Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to do another special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. This one comes from Liam. Hi Bryan, hope you find this enjoyable and stimulating. I listened to the album this song is from last year after having seen the cover over and over and was immediately sucked into it. Cheers. So we are going to be listening to the group Stereolab. The song we're checking out comes off of the Dots and Loops album from 1997. The track is called Brakhage. Let's dive in and see what's going on. Coming up on the halfway point here, and it's all relatively similar in the foundation. Nothing's really changed. All of our evolution, all of our movement is in the ornamental ideas. A lot of really fun rhythms in this track. It's interesting how jazzy this is, despite the heavy electronic influence in a lot of it. Like even that guitar line, that's such a jazz thing to do. The chords are very jazzy. And we're gonna finish it off like we started. Alright. Yeah, this is a track that exists on a singular idea. The drums, the chord progression, the guitar lick, even the vocals themselves in many cases are static. There are a couple of variations to the vocal lines, and we do hear a couple of different drum ideas as transitions, but once we get back into that groove, which we exist most of the song exists within, it's that same static underlying element. All of the dynamic qualities come from the layering. And there's a lot of layers that go on in here. We got drums, we got bass, we got electronic sounds, synthesizers possibly, we got two sets of vocals. We have a set of bells, I think. And it all creates rhythmic juxtaposition. This is like the core of everything, is rhythmic complexity through layers. When you bring in the background vocals and their syncopation, and you bring in the two syncopated hits on the guitar at the end of every phrase. Bum, bum, cha, 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 cha. You get those really offbeat hits that add to the syncopation that sort of increase the intensity, leaving out of the phrase, going into the next one. All of it is syncopated against one another, and it creates something that is incredibly infectiously groovy. I kind of love it for that. But it does so in a bit of a static manner. And I had mentioned that the complexity comes through the layers, and it really is about combining layers. What happens if we have just the primary vocals and the guitar and the bass? What happens if we throw some bells in there? What if we remove the bass and add background vocals? And we've talked about this before, the building block approach. You have one idea per instrument, and you're just changing up the combinations of instruments that are turned on at any one time. And if you turn them all on, you get a highly complex section, which we did here in the middle, is sort of the high point. The song acts as a bell curve, starting out with the static, rising in intensities, hitting a peak near the middle, and then reducing the intensity to come back out to that white noise. And so when you listen to the rhythmic components of the track, and you listen to the density of the layers, we do have an increase in complexity until we hit around the middle point. I don't want to say that it's perfectly symmetrical, because I don't think it is, but around the 3 minute mark, 3:15, is when we begin to see a bit of the decline and the removal of ideas. And then we do hit like minute 4, I think it was, where we sort of have a reset and go into something new for 8 bars or something. But it's not just complexity of rhythm, it's also complexity of melody. While most of this is ornamental, 2 or 3 notes, such as the guitar, bum, bum, just 2 notes at the end of every phrase. I think the bells only have like 3 or 4 notes in their little idea, but you get those bass runs that are like 8 or 9 beats or 8 or 9 hits. You have the 5 or 6 notes of the background vocals. Oh, actually, the background vocals pair up with the bells occasionally, don't they? Ba-da-dum, bum, ba-da-dum, something like that. Yeah, I think they do line. Actually, there's a lot of things that line up. The guitar, those 2 guitar notes are also typically shared with the last 2 notes of the main vocal. They might have a couple notes coming into it, but they'll always have that bum bum. Those will be the last 2 notes of the main vocal line. Um, so there's a lot of things lining up here. But when you take into account the bass movement and the bells and the background vocals and the lead vocals and all of these more melodic lines, not melodic, longer lines, we'll call it that, instead of the shorter ornamental ones, you end up with heavy use of counterpoint and counterpoint through harmony as well. As I mentioned, that the vocals tend to get paired up with another instrument. So we have 2 instruments versus 2 instruments in some of these lines. And so we get the rhythmic complexity from the syncopation of, for instance, our second vocal and the bells, but we also get the melodic and harmonic counterpoint listening to the 2 vocals in opposition of each other. And so the complexity rings true in multiple ways throughout this track. And I think that pretty much wraps up everything that I find really interesting about this. It is groovy, rhythmic, layered, dense, but it comes across simple. If you listen to this and you're like, well, that was a nice little groovy track, you're not wrong. They put a lot of work into making this palatable and listenable despite the complexity that's going on, which kind of reminds me of something else, which seems to be an inspiration for this, or maybe this inspired things that would come later, and that's electronic music. I feel like there's a strong electronic component to this, but I have no idea which direction the influence goes. I know electronic music was coming about. Somewhere in the 80s is where it started to pick up and take off. I know we had Kraftwerk. Was that the band or the album? Oh, yeah, Computer World. And that was mid 80s or something, and they had been making music for a while. So electronic music was present for at least a decade before this. But this almost feels like, what if we made electronic music with primarily acoustic instruments? Not acoustic, physically played instruments. Guitars, bells, voices. There is a synthesizer in there, and we did have that early panning effect, and we do have the white noise static thing coming in for our bookend, intro and outro. There are certainly some electronic elements to this, but for the most part, everything feels hand played. Traditional instruments. I think that's the word I need to use from now on. The traditional instruments. But the idea of building block based composition, or what probably is more accurate in the electronic world, is loop based composition, where you build a loop on an instrument and then you turn the instrument on or off in your loop workstation. I guess it's also an audio workstation, huh? Just a very different interface. I don't know how to work with looping programs, but it's the same general gist. But this is done with guitars and bells and keyboards rather than digitally. Yeah, I think that's it right there. That might be the main thing that I kind of see that connection there. All right, that certainly. Oh, one last thing is the intro outro. I kind of pictured that as like pirate radio, where you're kind of like trying to find, well, not just pirate, but all radio stations back then, but you're trying to find like the exact placement, and you kind of like phases in, phases out, you get the crackles, and then eventually you get it. But maybe you're in a car and you're driving away from a radio tower and it starts to fade out at the end. That's kind of what I pictured from that. I don't know how close to their intentions the intro and outro are, but that's what I pictured. I'm going to some lyrics. We're going to figure out what's going on there, and then we're going to wrap this up. I think it's interesting that I wrapped up my musical thoughts comparing it to electronic music because this 100%, now that I know the lyrics, feels like a sample that's been manipulated. There's only two lines in this whole song. We need so many things to keep our days lives going, and we can be bound, run around, fooled animals bite its tail. And that's it. It's they get playful with it. In what part of the sentence they use for each portion of the melody. Occasionally they'll add a little bit of extra things. At one point it says, instead of we need, it just says many things to keep our lives going. They'll repeat lives unlike they did the first time around. Eventually they also add in the word stupid to keep our stupid lives going. Um, During the animal bit, instead of saying we can be bound, it says he can be bound. Run around, around and around. The background vocals just repeat a bunch of stuff. Keep our stupid lives going, keep our stupid lives going, to keep our lives, many things, to keep our lives, many things, so many things, lives going. Just kind of taking the words of these two sentences and putting them in rhythmic ways. It really is more about, I think, maybe the sound of the words, but more specifically the rhythm of the words and the notes, again, for the counterpoint that are important more so than saying the words themselves. The same is true about the line about bound animals. They just take some of these words and repeat them and put them in different orders and cut them short and extend them out a little bit. It reminds me of Gong, actually, in a way that the words begin to lose their meaning, and it just becomes the sounds that are being said. It kind of just becomes gibberish, where it's more about the tone, the rhythm, and the delivery, the texture, more so than the words themselves. They're said so often, they just kind of the meaning fades into the background and the musical component of the vocal delivery takes effect. And like I said, it kind of reminds me of samples. You have this one sentence and you chop it up and distort it and stretch it and duplicate it and repeat it, and then you put it in your song in rhythmic and melodic ways. Maybe even pitch shifting, which I don't think they did here, but that would definitely add to the electronic flair if they attempted something like it. Oh, maybe they did. I'm trying to remember back to the melodies. I remember them being riffs or loops or ostinatos with the vocal work, but it's possible that we also changed some notes around. I didn't notice that. But the general idea here is that, once again, there's another component to this track that is done traditionally. They are literally repeating all these words over and over in rhythmic fashion, but it's very similar to the way that sampled lines get used in electronic tracks. It's really neat to listen to this. I wonder if the rest of the album is like this. What if we made an electronic album with, traditional instruments? I wonder if the rest of their lyrics are like this too, where they're dense in delivery but not dense in unique thoughts, so to speak. And where they just kind of take a couple of lines and find ways to repeat them in ways that feel right for the song. Because I think it's a really interesting project, an interesting way to go about crafting music. I mean, this is one of my favorite things. What if we did black metal but not with a metal band? I love hearing stuff like that. um, it's always interesting to see what happens when you remove a sound from the sound? How much of metal is the angstiness of the distorted guitars? What does metal sound like when played without them? How would you go about creating some of that aggression without the use of distortion and overdrive? And seeing the creativity that people go through as they try to work through these problems. Like this, just memorizing all these little rhythmic ideas to create the juxtaposition that is so easily done, so easily performed, I should say, in electronic music where you just play the sample and it's it's pre-chopped up. You've done that yourself. Though there's also the performance side of it if you're going to chop up the vocals live, but still you don't have to remember the words. You're just remembering the rhythm that you want to push the button on. So it's a different set of skills. Not that one's any better than the other, but it's just one of those things where you have to figure out the logistics of it. You're taking it outside of its normal environment. How do you still recreate those same ideas? So I find that really fascinating. Those are my thoughts on Stereolab's Brakhage. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section. Give me your opinions, perspectives, if you enjoyed this or not, anything like that, let me know. Above that in the description box, you'll find a link for Linktree. That takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. We do have one more special selection today. If you're not interested in that, though, it is Sonic Youth, though. I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. We're going to check out some brand new music. Until next week, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.